Mira had learned long ago that the best way to survive in Blackridge Castle was to be invisible. She moved through the stone hallways with her eyes down and her steps quiet, carrying trays of food, scrubbing pots, and folding linens that smelled of lavender and smoke. She was wolfless, the only one in a kingdom built entirely on the strength of the wolf inside every living soul. Where others could shift into powerful beasts with eyes that glowed amber in the moonlight, Mira remained only herself, soft-skinned and ordinary, forever standing at the edge of every room. The other servants whispered about her when they thought she could not hear, though she always could. They called her broken, hollow, a girl with no second half. Even kindness, when it came, often arrived wrapped in pity, which stung worse than cruelty. She had stopped expecting anything different from life. She simply worked, ate little, slept less, and tried not to be noticed by anyone, especially not by the nobles who ruled over them all. So when the head housekeeper grabbed her arm one evening and said the king needed someone, anyone, to bring soup to the nursery, Mira's stomach turned cold. "Why me?" she asked. "Because no one else will go," the housekeeper said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "The new nanny quit an hour ago," said the children nearly clawed her hands off. "The king is furious. Just leave the tray and get out before they notice you." Mira had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the castle had. Alpha King Damian Voss had lost his mate 3 years earlier, the night their twins were born. Since that day, the children, a boy named Ash and a girl named Wren, had never been at peace. They cried through the night. They snarled at anyone who came near. They shifted too early, too violently, their small wolf forms trembling with a fear no one could explain. Healers came and went. Nannies came and went faster. The court had begun to call them cursed, though no one dared say it where the king might hear. Mira did not believe in curses. She believed in fear, because she understood it better than most people in that castle ever could. She carried the tray up the spiral staircase, her arms shaking slightly, not from the weight of the soup, but from the thought of what waited behind the nursery door. She could already hear them, the high, broken cries of children, who had been crying for so long that their voices had gone hoarse. She pushed the door open with her shoulder. The room was dim, lit only by a low fire. 2 small wolf pups, no bigger than house cats, crouched in the corner of an enormous bed, their fur bristling, their eyes wide and wild. A broken vase lay scattered near the window. The air smelled of fear, sharp and metallic, the kind of fear that lived in a body long after danger had passed. Mira set the tray down slowly and did not move closer. She had expected the pups to growl, to snap, to do whatever it was that had sent every other woman running. Instead, something strange happened. The smaller pup, the girl, Wren, lifted her head and went still. Her brother followed a moment later, both pairs of eyes fixed on Mira, not with hostility, but with something closer to confusion. Mira lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged a respectful distance away, and said nothing at all. She simply existed there, quiet and unthreatening, her hands resting in her lap. Minutes passed. The pups did not relax entirely, but they did not attack either. Slowly, cautiously, Wren crept forward, sniffing the air, and finally pressed her small body against Mira's knee. Mira held her breath, unsure what to do, and then gently rested her hand on the pup's back. Wren did not flinch. A moment later, Ash crawled forward too, curling against her other side. For the first time and longer than anyone in the castle could remember, the nursery fell silent. Mira did not understand what had happened, but she stayed there all night, the 2 pups asleep against her, until dawn light crept through the curtains. Word of what happened spread through the castle by morning. The housekeeper, stunned, reported it to the steward, who reported it to the king himself. Damian Voss arrived at the nursery door with the heavy steps of a man who had grown used to disappointment, fully expecting to find another exhausted, frightened servant and 2 screaming children. Instead, he found his pups sleeping peacefully, curled against a girl he did not recognize, a wolfless servant with flour still dusted on her apron. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, simply watching. There was something almost unbearable about the sight. His children, finally at rest, finally safe, comforted by someone who held no rank, no title, and no wolf at all. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, careful not to wake the twins. Mira, my lord, she whispered, not daring to move. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Stay with them, he said finally, for now. That single sentence changed the course of Mira's life. In the days that followed, Mira learned things about the twins that no healer or scholar had ever discovered. She noticed that whenever a wolf-born caretaker entered the room, even one trying to be gentle, the pups would tense immediately, their small bodies bracing as if waiting for something terrible to happen. She realized, slowly, that it was not cruelty they feared, it was power. Every wolf who came near them, even with the kindest intentions, carried an aura of dominance, an invisible weight that came from simply having a wolf inside them. To pups who had lost their mother in the very moment of their birth, that weight felt like danger, like loss happening all over again. Mira had no wolf. She carried no dominance, no aura of control, nothing for their frightened instincts to brace against. She was simply a person, soft and quiet, with nothing to prove and nothing to take. For the first time since their mother's death, Wren and Ash were not being managed, or soothed, or handled. They were simply being sat with. She began spending entire days with them, not as a trained nanny, but as someone who treated them like children, rather than problems to be solved. She told them stories about the kitchens, about the bread that rose too high and spilled over the pans, about the old cat that slept by the ovens and stole sausages when no one was looking. She did not try to stop their tears when they came. She simply stayed close, letting them cry until they were ready to stop, never rushing them, never flinching from their grief. Damian began visiting the nursery more often, drawn by curiosity at first, then by something he could not quite name. He would stand in the doorway, watching Mira braid Wren's hair while Ash dozed against her shoulder, and feel a strange ache in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself in 3 long years. "How do you do it?" he asked her one evening, after the twins had finally fallen asleep. Mira considered the question carefully. "I don't do anything, my lord," she said. "I just don't ask them to be anything other than what they are." Damian said nothing, but something in his stern face softened, just slightly. As the weeks passed, the castle began to notice the change. The twins still struggled, still had nights of fear and frustration, but they were no longer constant storms of grief and panic. They laughed sometimes, small surprised sounds that startled even themselves. They asked for Mira by name. The kitchen staff, who once whispered about her with pity, now whispered with something closer to wonder, though not everyone in the castle was pleased by what they saw. Lord Lorne, the king's cousin and a powerful figure at court, watched Mira's rising influence with growing unease. He had long positioned himself as a guardian of the young heirs, hoping to secure influence over the future of the kingdom through his closeness to the children. A wolfless servant, succeeding where trained nobles had failed, threatened the careful image he had built for himself. He began speaking quietly to other nobles, suggesting that something was not right about a girl with no wolf calming children with such powerful bloodlines. He hinted at forbidden magic, at unnatural influence, at dangers the king was too blinded by grief to see. Rumors spread like smoke through the castle halls, twisting Mira's gentle patience into something sinister in the mouths of those eager to believe it. Mira heard the whispers, of course. She always heard them, but for the first time in her life, she did not shrink away from them. She had 2 small children who needed her, and she refused to let fear chase her out of the one place she had ever truly mattered. Lorne, growing bolder, decided to force the matter into the open. During a formal gathering of the court, with nobles from across the kingdom present, he rose to his feet and demanded that Mira be brought before them. Damian, seated at the head of the hall with Mira and the twins nearby, felt his jaw tighten as his cousin's voice rang out, accusing the girl of using dark magic to bind the children's loyalty, suggesting she be tested or banished from the castle entirely. A heavy silence fell over the hall. Mira felt every eye turn toward her, the same way they always had, judging, doubting, certain she did not belong. For one terrible moment, the old fear rose in her chest, the instinct to lower her eyes and disappear. Then she felt small hands grip her sleeves. Wren and Ash, sensing the tension in the room, the danger directed at the only person who had ever made them feel safe, did something no one expected. Their small forms shimmered and shifted, faster and more controlled than anyone had ever seen from them before, until two wolf pups stood firmly in front of Mira, baring their teeth not in fear, but in protection. The hall fell utterly silent. Damian rose slowly from his seat, his presence filling the room the way only a true alpha king's could. He walked forward, past his stunned cousin, and knelt beside his children, placing a steady hand on each small back. "For 3 years," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, "I watched healers, nobles, and trained nannies fail to give my children a single night of peace. I watched my pups suffer in ways I could not fix, no matter how much power or wealth I commanded." He paused, looking up at the assembled court. This woman asked for nothing. She sought no favor, no title, no reward. She gave my children the first true comfort they have known since their mother died, simply by being kind. He turned to Lorne, his expression hard as stone. "If there is magic here, cousin, it is not dark. It is the kind of magic that cannot be bought, commanded, or demanded. It is patience. It is love freely given. And I will not allow you, or anyone in this hall, to twist that into something shameful." Lorne opened his mouth to protest, but the king's voice cut through the hall once more. "I am the Alpha King of Blackridge," Damian said, "and it is my right to choose my mate. I choose her. Wolf or no wolf, status or no status, I choose Mira." The hall erupted into murmurs, shocked and disbelieving, but no one dared speak against him directly. Lorne, his face pale with fury and humiliation, was quietly escorted from the gathering that same evening, and stripped of his standing at court before the week's end. Mira stood frozen at the center of it all, her heart pounding, unable to fully believe the words she had just heard. She looked down at Wren and Ash, who had shifted back, and now stood pressed against her legs, looking up at her with open trust, the same trust they had given her on that very first night. In the months that followed, the castle slowly began to change. The whispers about Mira shifted from cruelty to respect, though not everyone accepted the change easily. She did not seek to silence her doubters with anger. She simply continued doing what she had always done, caring for the twins with patience and honesty, treating every person in the castle, servant or noble, with the same quiet kindness she had once longed for herself. Wren and Ash grew steadier with each passing season, their nightmares fading, their laughter growing louder and more frequent. They no longer flinched at the approach of footsteps in the hallway. They ran to greet Mira each morning, climbing into her lap without hesitation, calling her by a name that made her chest ache with a happiness she had never expected to feel. Damian, too, found himself changed. The hardened grief that had shadowed him for 3 years slowly eased, replaced by something gentler, something he had thought he might never feel again. He watched Mira with his children, watched the life return to his household, and understood, finally, that strength had never required a wolf at all. On a quiet evening, long after the court had grown used to the sight of a wolfless queen walking the castle halls, Damian found Mira in the nursery, the twins asleep on either side of her, their small chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. He sat down beside her without a word, watching his children sleep soundly for what felt like the first time in his life. "You gave them something none of us could," he said softly. Mira smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Wren's forehead. "I just stayed," she said. "That was all they ever needed." Outside, the moon rose high over Blackridge Castle, calm and silver, and for the first time in 3 long years, the nursery remained silent through the entire night.